fMRI is not the only interesting technique that has been developed for the MRI machine. There are several others that I would like to bring up. One of them is called diffusion imaging, or diffusion weighted or diffusion tensor imaging. The idea here is pretty simple. If you imagine a hose with water flowing through it, if we put two holes in the hose, one we drip a little food dye, and the other we look through, how long will it take for us to see the red food dye? It's not going to be right away. It's going to depend on the rate of flow of the water through the hose. That's exactly what diffusion weighted imaging does, is it magnetically tags the flow of water through the brain and can detect the diffusion rate, how fast that water is flowing. Areas that are going to have the greatest amount of flow are going to represent, for example, axons that are connecting different areas of the brain. And we can actually create these maps of the connective regions of the brain, right? You can see here the movement into from the spinal cord into the medulla, out into the cerebellum. Down here in the middle, that would be the corpus callosum, the extensions into the cerebral cortex. Right? You can see the extensive interconnections of the brain. Right? Here's another interconnected map. Areas where this can be particularly useful is, for example, in traumatic brain injury, where particularly in the mild form where there's no observable damage to the brain, we can actually see tiny tears in the brain. So this is somebody who has not had a concussion, and this is somebody who has. And you can see, hopefully, the slight tearing of tissue actually can be detected in these diffusion weighted imaging when no other techniques can discern any damage. And this kind of repetitive brain injury, doing lots of tiny microscopic tearing in the brain, is what builds up over time in, for example, sports-related injuries that cause the brain to break down. You can look for changes in connective symmetry between the two hemispheres, which have been linked to things like schizophrenia. There are, not quite diagnosable differences, but certainly some interesting areas of research looking at differences in the connections between the brain. It's also been looked at for automatic cancer detection, where the tumors have a different diffusion rate than other parts of the brain, and we could actually automate the detection of the cancer tumors down to a much more precise or even microscopic level, allowing for much more precision in our surgeries. Right now, a human being has to map out where the tumors are. There's also something called MR spectroscopy, which attempts to use the signal that is released from the MRI absorption of energy to locate specific chemicals. Right? So the biggest chemical that we're going to see is we're going to see water, H2O, the biggest molecule. Once we get rid of the water signal, though, we can see a wide range of neurotransmitter levels, even signals that indicate neuronal growth. But this is a way of analyzing the chemical components of the brain at a much more fine detail than even things like a PET scan can do. So there are a lot of fascinating techniques that are being developed for the use of the MRI machine, and again is one of the reasons why this machine and these techniques are really propelling the neuroscience to be the dominant perspective currently in psychology.